Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. This is my favorite part of our session. So far, you have heard from the faculty, you heard from two of our wonderful preceptors, and now, in keeping true faith to our residency triad, we are now going to hear from our students. So thank you. These are four of our outstanding residents currently out in the field. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And what I'd like to do is I want to take a couple of minutes to have them introduce themselves, tell us what residency location they are at and who their preceptor is. So ma'am, I'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Kim Salazar. I am an Army physician. I've been actually a physician for 17 years, internal medicine, and then allergy immunology training. And I am currently doing my residency at North Central Baptist here in San Antonio, and my preceptor is Bill Wechter.
Major Easter. I am a pediatrician by trade, currently at the 59th and an analytics residency there. And my preceptor is Mr. Douglas Stevens.
Anya Quillen. I'm an RN, past 15 years, and most of that time has been the Burn Center, the Institute of Surgical Research. And I'm currently at BAMC, Brooke Army Medical Center, and my preceptor is Colonel David Parker.
Hey, Bobby Green. I'm just a healthcare administrator. I'm not a clinician like they are. Interesting in MHA, we have all these people up here. It's all clinicians. I'm at Metropolitan Methodist. The CEO, Greg Seiler, is my preceptor.
Thank you all very much for the introductions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to moderate this panel by asking the students questions. But we welcome your questions. So at the end, if I've not asked something that you're interested in, by all means, I will give you an opportunity to ask them questions. I will come across to you, and you will actually... Interesting. Okay. And you will use the microphone to kind of address the questions, but just make sure that you kind of hold the microphone as close as you can. So the very first question that I have for you all, and I'd like for each one of you to actually address this question. So we've been sharing this entire day, really, of how important it is for you all to have a residency experience where you're able to take what you learned during your didactic year and tailor a residency plan to kind of help you grow those competencies. Can you just describe briefly what your initial meeting with your preceptors was like and how you established that residency plan?
Sure. So I actually had the luxury of doing my residency in San Antonio, so I was able to meet with my preceptor for lunch sort of midway through my didactic year. We got together and had lunch together and chatted, and that sort of just at least let him know who I was and what my background was and kind of what some of my goals were for the year. And then ahead of actually starting my residency in July, I did a lot of reading about the organization I was joining and just, sort of Google stalked the Baptist health system and the leaders in that organization to understand a little bit more about it. And one of the things I made clear to him is coming from a clinical background, I really wanted to push myself out of my comfort zone and try and have some time in some of the business operations and non-clinical operations so that he could kind of help me navigate that a little bit.
So my residency is a little bit different. So it was specifically analytics for the Air Force. Normally, I don't think they'd let a physician in there, so I was surprised they did and really happy they did because I love data analytics and data science. But when I met with my preceptor, it was kind of like coming home because that's where I did my residency, 59th. I did my peds residency there during BRAC, transitioned up to BAMC. So when we sat down at first and planned out the residency, I made it very clear that I just wanted to kind of ignore the clinical side as much as I could because I'd had plenty of that and I needed to hear more of the administrative and business side of the house, and it worked out really well because I sat there, right? My office was there. I was engaged with everybody in the business office and in the RMO office the entire time and was able to really focus in on that, and there was a lot of leeway in how we planned that. So.
Very similar for me in a lot of ways is that I was also local and I was able to see Colonel Parker much earlier before the residency phase. There was a point where we had a leadership course and there was a portion that we were supposed to have an interview and kind of ask leadership questions, but that happened and we were able to discuss other things as well, and that kind of segued us into the actual residency phase when we met again. But I was also able to meet him in the course when he discussed a couple of presentations and a couple of different MHA topics. So there was a lot of FaceTime there that allowed me to get like a perspective of what to expect when I met him actually on the residency phase. But however, Colonel Parker is well practiced, very seasoned at having preceptees as well. And so I feel like he was very structured. He already knew what I needed to do. So there was a very good transition between getting into the residency phase and planning to do my actual residency plan. And so I think he guided me a bit and helped me move into thinking about what I needed to do, and also encouraging me or challenging me to get out of my comfort zone, because I could have easily gone very clinical. But he said, get in there and look at those things that you don't really know anything about. And it actually became much more rewarding that way, and I found wonderful topics and projects that way that I never thought I would work on. So that was actually very helpful.
So yeah, being at a civilian site, when Greg and I sat down for the first time, we took the residency manual, and it's got some of these different departments that you need to make sure you hit. Kind of the first thing we did was, this is the person in charge of that, this is the person in charge of that, this is the person in charge of that, and go. And so I made it pretty clear to him that I wanted to see everything there was to see at Methodist, because I wanted to see the civilian side of healthcare. Even though I'm a young officer, I'm prior enlisted, so I've been, I've seen DOD. So I made sure that I hit all those wickets that were in the residency manual, and then I just continued to just get into as many weeds as I could.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, my next question, Peter and Anya, I'm going to go straight to you too, okay? So we've spent quite a large amount of the time today talking about competency development, the importance of that. So what I'd like for you to do is just describe a little bit how you and your preceptor tailored your residency experience to actually develop the competencies that you might have decided to work on, or what was your approach to that?
I guess I'll start first. So I think looking at the bear, every once in a while we did look at that, and the residency plan, I think more heavily so, and how that tied into the bear. There were some elements there where we were tested on, and you could see based on the graphical representation where the weakest points. Definitely mine, not coming from a military background. There was a lot of military doctrine and different things in there that I knew that I had a weakness for. But again, Colonel Parker really guided me and pointed me in direction for things that I was looking for in the MTF, like readiness. I really hunted down as much readiness factors as I could. What were we doing to move towards that direction? And he would give me guidance. And what I thought was very helpful was that he structured weekly meetings, 30 minutes a week, where we can meet and discuss things in detail, how I did the week before, what I was looking for the next week. That way we could discuss even critical thinking things that maybe I saw something on the surface, and he could point out subject matter experts and say, this is who you need to talk to, this is who you should probably talk to, and we're kind of looking for that particular item. And that just opened up different doors multiple times. So that was how we kind of went about it.
So for us, we did an overview of the bear, just kind of looked at where things were. And then because it was a brand new residency, we planned around, and we just kind of figured out how to kind of build up that rotation schedule. So we started more with kind of the foundation, so facilities and healthcare technology and those sorts of things, and built our way up into the clinical, so that you kind of had the whole foundation before and then worked your way up. So that's how we used the bear. One other thing I did personally that I think was helpful was I used in the comments section of the bear, you're supposed to write down what you think of a rotation. And for the first year, I had done SWOT on each one of those, so it was just like a little brief, hey, this was something I was really good at, I need to not spend too much time here, and that helped out as we were looking at it too. So
Great,
or
thank you.
the opposite, right?
Excellent, thank you. Okay, Bobby and Peter, I'm going to come back to you on this one as well. Talked a lot about deliverables today, so they're very well aware of all the deliverables that you have throughout the year. Can you just talk briefly about what you did to stay on top of all those deliverables, since you're away from the campus and you're often running and staying busy at your organizations? Bobby, you can go first.
Do you mean like the project? Like,
No. So
like
you know
all
you
the-
know all those key dates that you
Okay.
have, all those deliverables. So there's so many, right? Your discussion questions, your residency,
All right.
all that good stuff. How did you stay on top of all that?
I understand the question, but it's almost I just didn't I don't know, I just didn't think those deliverables were that hard. So I mean, you go in, you see the residency manual, you grab all that stuff, you put it into your Outlook calendar, and you tell it to remind you when it's coming up. I hope I didn't make that too easy.
There you go. Good job. No.
That's how I did it.
And okay, good. Peter.
So I told a couple of my colleagues before they left to text me when something was due, and so
Which is what we did all didactic year as
yeah,
well.
so, no, but yeah, I think at this point, if you can't, if as a resident you can't manage your time, then we got a bigger problem. So, but yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you. Not to make it overcomplicated, right? So good. All right. Let's go ahead and go with Kim and Anya on this one. Can you talk a little bit about how you selected your portfolio projects?
I think that's sort of, it's not like I had a grand plan at the beginning and stuck to it. You sort of, as you go through the year, one project I worked on all year was something that my preceptor brought to me, which was we were trying to develop a center of excellence for hip fracture care at North Central Baptist. And so there was a lot of project management, and it was a great project for me because I could lean on my clinical experience, but also understand like accreditation and joint commission and all kinds of other things that I was able to put. So that was one project that I really got from the beginning and held on to. But I would just say otherwise, I didn't stress that much about it. I just tried to every day and every meeting and every rotation and everything I was doing, I just tried to see what I could learn. To be honest, this is maybe the advantage of being older going through this program, but and I knew a lot of things I would be working on weren't going to turn into projects, and that was fine because I was still really learning from all of them. And then I would just sort of I had monthly meetings with my preceptor. And I would go in with an agenda and say, these are kind of some of the things I'm working on, like what do we think would maybe be one of the best ones to turn into a project, and just sort of did that. So I just took on anything that anybody wanted to include me in. I really did. I didn't ever say no. I wanted to be a part of any. I mean, Brian, I sat right outside of his office for a while, and he'd come out and be like, hey Kim, good, and I'd jot down notes and I'd look into it. I'd start doing. Maybe it would turn into something, maybe it wouldn't, but I was learning the whole time. So I just didn't stress that much about the projects. I had more than I needed. I mean, I had many really meaningful things I did that I did not turn into projects because I just didn't, So I just kind of let them come to me as the year went on. I mean, that's how I did it.
Very similar situation. I felt that BAMC is used to having Baylor residents, so they know where to find us. And there is no door to our office, so we get frequent visitors. And so I felt the minute I hit the ground, people were ready to give me something. However, I felt as just starting out and trying to figure out what I needed to do. And to set up my residency plan appropriately, I kind of had to stall diving in right away. I could have, but I think it's best to lay out your plan before you start taking things on. So trying to find projects personally, things that I liked, I did that too. Mostly because I started off in more administrative areas rather than the clinical. Everything seemed new, brand new, shiny, exciting. I kind of fell in love with facilities and logistics, things that I never thought that nursing would kind of end up in. And I actually found nurses in these places, and so it kind of surprised me. And so I learned so much from that, and I think what the advice someone had given me is find your best practice, Anya. Find that first, quickly, and then that's the easiest thing. Work on that, and you could work on the projects throughout the year. And so I felt like I was looking for that quickly off the bat. Maybe that did help me, maybe it didn't, but I saw so much best practices that it was hard to choose. So again, there's a lot of projects out there. BAMC had quite a few. I really used Colonel Parker again and some guidance, those meetings, to really kind of figure out, what had true work that I should move towards, or maybe I should back off of some things that maybe I shouldn't touch. not sure or whatnot. So, I mean, the guidance was very helpful in determining what I should move forward with. So, kind of similar situation, just deciding, you know, what you want to work on and doing a mixture of what you want to do and what the organization might need at that time. So.
Thank you. So Anya, you talked about best practices, and I think that's one of the most important ones for us because we try to take what you all showcase and kind of share across the enterprise. So Bobby, I'm going to start with you on this one. And what I'd like for all of you to do is just briefly describe what your best practice actually was and how did you end up choosing that particular project?
Anya chose my best practice. So Anya and another resident came to Metro. We were walking them around, showing them different things, some of the stuff that I thought was unique, and I was actually kind of trying to get her perspective because I'm not a nurse. Most of my career has been biomedical repair and logistics. So I took her to, we have a resource room that's also our discharge lounge. It's also a VTC that you can have one person watching 8 patients at one time and then not have to have sitters in the room. And Anya was like, this is incredible. I've never seen this so well done before. And I was like, thank you, Anya. I shall write my best practice. So that's how my best practice spawned. When I talked to Greg about it, Greg has lots of experience. He's been in multiple different HCA hospitals. He's been with HCA for a really long time. And he said, if you're going to write about the discharge lounge and everything that they're doing in there, make sure you talk about the people because the people are what's making it work. It's not the fact that we have a place to put patients and put them in there, but so I went and talked to them and spent a lot of time with the 2 nurses and what they do and all the stuff that they're looking at within the facility because they're actually doing more of a push-pull technique. Where there's these 2 nurses sit there all day long, look at the computer, and are actually looking for patients to discharge. And if the stuff is, if all the wickets haven't been hit to discharge them, then they start actually making phone calls. And it was really funny because Anya was like, I love this room. And so that's actually how I found my best practice.
Great, thank you. Anya.
Oh, is that next one for me? What else can I say about best practice? I think, and maybe
one
this
did you
is
write
more
up?
for the preceptees, I think that when you find something you're really interested in and after you get it, you know, a nice good clearance that it's something really good in the organization, I feel like it's good to start the process of trying to identify whether it meets the criteria for, bless you, meets the criteria for what the program is asking for, because I think I found it, I was really excited, I started jumping in and onto different projects and I let it sit. And maybe I should have originally jumped on it and really did a deep dive into the metrics and what was going on to identify whether or not it fit appropriately. Because halfway through I kind of got scared and I was like, oh my gosh, this doesn't really work. But then after a while I looked at it a little deeper and I was like, oh yes it does. Okay, let's continue working on this. But it's good to probably up front do the deep dive and not just let it sit. So if there is anything I learned from doing my best practice, it's like if you find it, keep going with it until you could
And what was
fit
your
it
best
in.
practice?
Mine was the quality assurance and quality control cell that was placed inside a logistics area where they do medical maintenance. And they kind of had a 4-prong system in which they looked at quality assurance and quality control, and one of them was getting this ISO 9000 certification and what it took to audit and ensure that we met the requirements for that and the amount of work it took to do that. But the star particular one that was really exciting, that really sparked an interest, was the PSR system. They utilized a local patient safety reporting system to enhance the way that they removed medical equipment immediately from locations within the units, within the hospital. BAMC is large. We have like 70,000 pieces of equipment. The medically significant ones that touch patients are about 40,000. So of those, we have to consider like how quickly can we remove them from an area before they can get used again accidentally and create a sentinel event. And so it used to be 28 days. Imagine a piece of equipment sitting there. We weren't removing it, and that's because the PSR system had a lag in reporting. And so they wouldn't hear anything until later on. So now they actually remove same day or the next day. And so that was a big win for them. And they even honed the PSR system for the entire organization across the board for multiple MTFs to utilize the system in the same way. The other things I do are the super seep and investigations in terms of how much things cost and try to be more fiscally responsible in terms of those things. And they also, I couldn't believe the amount of recalls and things that would happen with these machines, and who's going to manage all of this, the thousands of equipment that would get affected, and what that meant in terms of high staff response to removing every single piece of those pieces of equipment if they couldn't digitally send out or ping out an update or something like that. So, I mean, wonderful work that they did, and they have so much more other things that they're thinking of. So they're constantly growing in the amount of unique ideas that they have for improving the way they do medical maintenance to prevent patient safety errors.
Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, so my best process was looking at finances within the DoD, within MHS 59 specifically, and how we cost allocate both our direct and indirect costs to the clinics, which anybody in the military right now is like, oh, yeah, okay. Because largely we ignore our direct costs because it's very hard to allocate those out. Mr. Stevens had figured out a way to do this a couple of years ago, which identified about a $30 million gap, you could say, at least gap in where we were negative if you looked at the clinic and how much money they were bringing in, if we were comparing to civilian care, right? So we don't do that. We don't look at that. The IRIS model that's come out, if you're familiar with that, is close, but it still doesn't do that. We assign costs kind of funny, where we assign pharmacy costs to providers who aren't necessarily prescribing the drugs that would cost that much, so all sorts of different stuff. But that practice is really cool because it allowed them to focus their resources and their time into those areas that are not being financially solvent, and then to code better. And by coding better and by resourcing better, he was able to take them from a $30 million gap to about a $2 million gap in just a very short period of time. So real simple stuff, but it bridged for me clinical and the healthcare administrator, because as a clinician, the thing you never want to hear is, man, you're doing so bad, put your knuckles out, let's slap you with the ruler, right? Because you're not making money according to the system that we're measuring. So,
Good, thank you.
So my best practice, I was super excited about, and I had a large part of developing. So one of the things that I really wanted to learn in the civilian healthcare system, because I don't think we do it as well in the military healthcare system, is managing patient experience and focusing on patient experience. And so during my didactic year, one of my projects had been on HCAPS. And so I had kind of really gotten into HCAPS, and we have a similar survey called TRIS in the military. But anyway, so we're really good in the civilian healthcare system, and many of you in this room know, like, you are incentivized and you are financially incentivized to have good patient experience. And so it's really something that everyone is focusing on. And we focus on the numbers. We focus on that quantitative score, and it's different in different healthcare systems, and it's different from year to year, even within the Tenet and Baptist health system. But we don't really look at the comments that the patients make, the qualitative data that we get, because that's harder to do. It's harder to trend, it's harder to analyze and stuff. So, but when I first got there, I was sitting in on some meetings, and the patient experience officer at the time was talking about how she wanted to develop a patient comments meeting, and I was like, oh, I'm in. This is so interesting to me. So I just went to her and said, like, I'd love to be a part of this. And funny enough, she ended up leaving about a month later, so it became my meeting. And so it's evolved, but we have a monthly patient comments meeting. We ended up splitting out ER and inpatient because ER comments is just, it's a different survey, and there's so much more volume. And we celebrate our positive comments. We actually go over the positive comments, especially when staff members are named, and we make sure they have that feedback, where there was no mechanism of really doing this before. I mean, directors could go in and pull down their comments, but but it wasn't like a dedicated time on the calendar every month to do, and so it just wasn't happening. And then with all the negative comments, we put them into 9 different buckets, and we trended them. Like, is it a facilities issue? Is it a nursing communication issue? Is it, and we trended them out. And anyway, it's been really fun. I've really enjoyed it, and I really do think it's allowed the leadership in our hospital to have a better sense, like a pulse of what the patients are feeling about their care. So that was my project.
Thank you. What great projects, great ideas. So wonderful. Okay, my next question for you. And Bobby, I'm going to start with you, and then you decide who else is going to answer this one. Okay? So yeah, let's do that. Okay. So we've talked today about the importance of the relationship between the preceptor, the faculty, the academic advisor, and the student in order for you to have a successful residency year. So what I'd like for you to do is kind of briefly describe what you did to maintain that relationship, and especially with your academic advisor who is not with you day to day like you were in your didactic year.
For the 4 of us, we're all local. We all stayed in San Antonio, and I'm going to assume that most of you in this room are not from San Antonio, which I would say would make it harder because, anytime the Navy needed anything, I would just drop by Commander Tower's office and I'd go see him. If we tried a couple of times for him and Greg to actually, and the 3 of us to have lunch together, and it didn't work out because of one of the 3 of us schedule, but. I would say that it's just much more easy locally. I tried to maintain my pulse on what's going on slightly in the Navy. That's actually a complete lie. I have not had any idea what's going on. But I would make sure that that Commander Towers and I were speaking regularly. I mean, we had text messages. I would make sure I stopped by. If I had to go to Fort Sam for something, I would always drop by his office. It's not like I'm trying to push off the question, but it's just so much easier for us than it is some of the other residents who are at some of these distances are a little farther away. It was just so much easier for me to just go over and knock on his door and see if he was in his office. So, I have to pick someone.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Don't make this hard.
All right, Anya.
All right. Well, I think just based on the nature of how the program is designed, it is natural that I think you start dwindling off with the advisor and start focusing more on what your preceptor is feeding you. And so I definitely felt in the beginning there was definitely, I'm still kind of talking to the advisor a whole bunch because I want to hear, am I setting up my residency plan correctly? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? But then once I got into the rhythm of the residency year, I kind of stopped talking to the advisor as much as I did, and I relied heavily on my preceptor for guidance and direction, talking about the residency plan. And then I would remember every once in a while, I need to talk to my advisor about something, probably my portfolio and my projects. And so then that was kind of mostly my focus with my advisor is, am I on the right track for my portfolio? Am I on the right track for that? But the whole time, it just ends up being a shift between the preceptor and the advisor. And then the site visit happens, and this is, again, being local and the possibility of this happening. This is when everybody gets to meet together, and we were successful. We were able to have an office visit, and I think that was good for everybody to see faces, but I think there was a working relationship there before with my advisor. So that was even an easier meeting, I think. And so from then, I think it just even dwindled off more until the portfolios got due. And then you're reaching out a little bit more to the advisor at that point. So I think it's a shifting between the two.
Okay, good, thank you. So Peter and Kim, this one's for you. Did you all have any opportunities to interact with other residents in the area, or perhaps visit other residency locations? And if so, how did that come about, and what did you take away from that?
Yeah, so I had several people reach out, especially if they weren't receiving something from their local residency for whatever reason, to come in and just get a look around. And most of it was because they just needed to come back to the military and see a military installation again, right? So, and they just reached out. Our class was close enough. Everybody knew everybody's number and felt comfortable to do that. I did go to BAMC for inpatient and hung out with with their inpatient staff for a little while, as well as I went and toured the Center for the Intrepid and a few other things where, because the 59th is an ambulatory surgical center, I wouldn't be able to do. So I think that's probably really important, and maybe fosters better collaboration between the hospitals too, as they have Baylor residents going through.
One thing I just wanted to actually make sure to mention, it sort of fits here, so I'm gonna wedge it in. But being a clinician, it was very important, and it's sort of interesting. You have two physicians on this panel because in our class of 50 there was 3 physicians, but so we're sort of overrepresented. But just to say that it was important to me to maintain my clinical skills. So I was very glad that my preceptor supported me in that. So I still went and saw patients at the allergy clinic at BAMC to maintain my credentials, and I had to renew BLS and ACLS during my year, and that was fully supported. And then I actually an elective that I didn't fit into my didactic year, but being local had the ability to do is I went back and joined the class behind me and did the Lean Six Sigma Black Belt course, which again my preceptor was very supportive of me doing that. So those were some like rotations, if you will, in terms of not really part of the residency, but were very valuable to me and important for my big picture career. So my preceptor was a former paramedic, air life paramedic, and still maintains really involved with STRAC, which is a San Antonio regional kind of, South Texas. So anyway, South Texas regional trauma center. You guys know what it is. But anyway, so I went to a couple meetings with him, and he also has good, strong relationships with a lot of the EMT folks in town. So he set up, and a couple of my classmates joined me. We went and spent a half day with the medical director for San Antonio Fire Department, Dr. Miramontes, who's a emergency medicine doctor. Very interesting day. And then we also Acadian, which is an ambulance service in San Antonio. The medical director is friends with my preceptor. So that was very interesting for me because it helped me to see the continuum of care pre-hospital and post-hospital, with community paramedic medicine becoming a bigger thing and stuff. So anyway, that was some of my experience, and it just had to do with my preceptor's relationships with folks in town.
Thank you. Okay, so you're almost at the end of your residency, right? Congratulations, by the way, on passing your portfolios and all that good stuff. But you still have a few more weeks. So as you think back on this last year, what would you do differently if you had a chance to do it again? And this is for all of you, so whoever wants to go first.
So I'll start. I think that in the beginning, and I'll be real honest, I've been in the military healthcare system my whole career, and it is very comfortable for me. And I wear my rank on my on my chest, and everyone knows who I am. I'm a physician, and I have some street cred when I walk into meetings typically and stuff. When I went to Baptist and no one knew who I was, it was very uncomfortable, and I'm in civilian clothes, and it's a different culture, and there's different things being talked about, and I mean, Brian, don't say this to anybody when you go back, but I was in one meeting and somebody asked me if I could be a part, help make copies with some things and stuff, and I'm happy to do that. I'm a team player, but I'm like, wow, they're really not getting what my skill set is, I'm here to do some meaningful work for you guys, So that was really uncomfortable for me, and I struggled quite a bit the first couple months, and my preceptor, who I've grown to have a very strong relationship with, and I have really learned a lot from, but he's a hands-off kind of preceptor. He was not going to hold my hand through this, so I had to figure a lot of it out on my own. So anyway, I would just say, if I could do it over again, I would not rush things as much in the beginning. I would just know that it's fine to just kind of be sitting in meetings, getting to know people, building relationships, because the relationships was the key to all of it. So and I just sort of felt like I needed to get started with something sooner, and I think I would just kind of relax a little bit more in the beginning and know that is sort of how the first couple months was going to go.
Okay, so I think the hardest part here was just the unstructured nature of the residency to start off. I think it was a good fit for me, and where I was with the right person. But I think if I did it over, the first thing I would do is just make sure that we've got an interesting kind of leadership model here in San Antonio, because we have the market, we have BAMC, we have Wilford Hall, and then Wilford Hall is its own wing. It gets kind of complicated. So I would have been sure to get in with each of those leaders right off the bat and say, you know, I'm here if you want to use me for anything. Because it took a good 6 months before I think people realized, oh, there's something that this Baylor resident could add, and maybe started throwing things at us. So, but that'll probably change with the next one. So good luck to them.
And I felt similar in a lot of ways to both of what you're saying, but also I think for me, just to add to that is, I was ready to jump into a project. I just felt like these projects we have to start. I felt behind all the time. Even when I got there, maybe the residents, other residents, because there was 3 of us there, by the way, they were already there a week before me, and I was like, oh man, I'm behind. I'm behind, you've been a week. But really, it's giving yourself that time to really look at what it is you need to accomplish and how you're going to do that. Reaching out to leaders ahead of time. But it took me a while to understand what you just said, the different markets we have. Where should I be going off-site? Maybe I should be going to the different locations. And I don't know if I would have known that off the bat. It took me a little bit to understand that piece, but I think that if I did it over again, it would be calm down and really look at what my plan should be, and don't jump into the projects right away, because you get overwhelmed by them right off from the start, and then you don't get the opportunity to see beyond them.
So I guess I kind of look at this question as, if you could give advice to someone, what would it be? And I would say, don't start in something that you absolutely wanted to do, because then you get, so for me it was finance. I was so interested in the way civilian sector finance worked. And they were working on the budget, and it was like they were getting ready to propose everything to division level. And I was so interested in that I really got caught up in it. And I was learning stuff, but I actually wasn't doing much. It was more, you know, the controller would put me right behind me, and he'd talk about what he was doing, and this is why we're doing it this way, and all this other stuff. But I wasn't actually doing much. But that's what I wanted to look at the most with my residency, which meant that almost, you know, once a week I was just checking back in with the controller. Hey, you do anything cool this week? You know, just to see what the finance team was up to. But I would just say that I should have stepped outside my comfort zone. I should have gone more clinical, which I definitely got into later on in the residency, but I probably should have started there, knowing full well that I was going to get sucked into finance and the numbers and all that stuff.
Thank you. Great advice. Okay, so my last question before I turn it over to the audience is, you have a room full of captive preceptors. They're ready to get started. What would be the #1 piece of advice you would give them so that they can get ready for their next student? And this is a question for all of you. So, Bobby,
Yeah,
go
I'll
ahead.
go first. So first I have to ask, who's a civilian? Who are the civilian people in here? Okay, so a few of them.
Preceptors.
Okay, so civilian preceptor. Okay, so I only had one gripe literally the entire time, and it's actually happened towards the end of the residency. Our program is really set up for us to learn, for us to experience. Some of the other graduate level schools that have residents that we're sending them to these same facilities, I almost look at them as almost having a job interview. And what I kind of experienced was when those residents started to show up, people kind of looked at me like, why aren't you going and getting coffee for me? And that just wasn't, I don't know. I don't want to make it sound so mean, but it really is, because that's really how I felt about though they were there, they were trying to get a job, they were trying straight out of grad school, they were a lot younger than I was. Army-Baylor is set up for us to learn from you, and in order to do projects that are to be helpful for your facility. And it was my experience at just my facility that the couple of the other residents that were there were really auditioning for jobs and would do whatever it was to get that job at the end of their residency. And so I would say that with the Army-Baylor students, if you're going to have residents there, they're there to learn, and they're there to learn from you. And some of the meaningless tasks, I'm prior Navy chief, which means that I'm very good at saying no to some things. So I was like, no, that is not it. There's nothing in that job that you want me to do right now that has anything that's going to help me in my future career, and I would absolutely say no to that. I don't know if some other residents would, but I guess that's my 2 cents.
In my situation, maybe I'll talk about what worked really well for me and what I thought was extremely helpful right off the bat, and that was, in one word, I could sum up multiple things: access. I felt pretty powerful with my little badge, having DCA access to get in any door that I didn't want to get into. So thank you for that access. Except for somehow I started dropping off the OBGYN area, but that's okay. But so I feel like access was really important. I could get to meetings, I could get through doors, I could meet with people I needed to meet to, I could, that sort of thing. But it wasn't just access to the organization. I think also access to knowledge and information. And we started off with a week of a facilities tour from head to toe of the facility, inside narrow pathways, all underneath the bowels of the organization. And it gave me an appreciation for what it took to run such a large organization. When as a nurse, I used to be in my little silo. This is my unit, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm taking care of. But when I saw all the behind the scenes, and this is perhaps why I'm still fascinated with logistics and facilities and loves that area so much, is because it really, that's where my eyes really opened. And that tour at the beginning was amazing because it really offered that to me. But it's not only access to those two things, it's access to people, access to the leaders, being in a location. We were positioned in the command suite, and I had access to speak to all the deputies about different topics that may have affected them. So it was access to people. And also it's like access to the calendar, the mecca, right, of everything that is happening in the organization, getting to know what's going on. I mean, he shared his calendar with us, and I could see everything that was happening, and I could request, hey, can I go to this? And yeah, I get a no sometimes, that's okay. But for a lot of them, I was able to attend, and having that ability to watch leaders converse and talk and share their ideas and critically think through things, just by being a fly on the wall most of the times, I was learning so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to directly speak to preceptors because, and I'm going to brag on Mr. Stevens for just a second. I think the reason that my residency this year was so good was because he knew what he knew. He knew what I knew as a clinician and where the two diverged. And so from the very second that we met the first day, it was kind of, he was asking me how he could benefit from my knowledge, and I was asking him how I could benefit from his, and it was a great mesh, right? To have that clinical, I mean, it was the Mayo model, right? You have the clinician and the administrator together. But even more, he tested me right off the bat. So he took me in and started looking at my database skills and my analytics skills. And when he saw what I could do, then he just kind of let go. And what came out of that between the two of us was really cool in terms of the products we were able to create, I think, and I think where it will lead to further down the road. So powerful if you do it that way.
So I think for the preceptors, my advice would be to get a good sense of the skill set, the experience of your resident, and so because we're all very different coming out of the Army-Baylor program, and some very senior, some more junior, some clinical, some not. So to really take stock of kind of what the skill set is of your resident, so that you can best guide their experience. So my preceptor actually ended up being a very good fit as well. He is a very hands-off leader. He is this is my vision and kind of go make it happen sort of, and that actually was great for me once I got my feet on the ground, because I've been doing this a while and I didn't really need my hand held through all the details of it. But the one thing I would say, even once you take stock of kind of what your resident is, what their background is and their strengths and things. Everybody needs two things: a good orientation. So like that first week that Anya described, I didn't really have. I would have loved, and so like a good orientation to your organization. It just helps to kind of get you knowing who the right people are, knowing where things are and things like that. So a good orientation up front, and if it's and you are probably too busy to do it, but have someone do it from your organization. And then the other thing I would say is just I'm going to echo the access part. My preceptor's intent was that I would have full access to, and he told me that from the very first meeting. He said, make me kick you out of a meeting. There is no meeting right now that I don't want you to be. He said, the only exception I can think of is every now and again we have some sensitive things, that have to do with trauma care in San Antonio, and since you're from BAMC, like, we might not want you in that meeting. But he pretty much said, make me kick you out of a meeting. I really want you to be at every meeting. Unfortunately, though, some of his subordinate leaders didn't get that message. So then, although that was his intent, there was times when I was asked to leave things that I think, and then Bill would later say, oh, no, you should have been there. So I would say, as the preceptor, make sure your team knows who we are and what your intent is for us in terms of having that full access, because it creates a little awkward situation for the resident when your preceptor is saying you should be there, and then other folks are saying you really shouldn't be here. So it just goes along with the access piece.
Great, thank you very much. So those are all the questions I have. I want to thank you for being so honest and open with your answers. But now I'd like to open it up to the audience. Faculty, preceptors, you have 4 fantastic students out here. What questions do you have for them? Anybody? Everybody's like, no, we're good. Really? Oh, thank you, sir.
So Ron Johnson, I'm with the VA healthcare system, and I've had a lot of experience precepting MHAs, and they're typically coming from either straight from undergrad to grad and then into the work experience, or they've had some work experience and gone back to get an MHA. But my resident this year is coming from a clinical background. So for the 3 clinicians up here, I'm just interested in what was your perspective going from the clinical side of the house to the administrative side, so to speak, and then what were your expectations, and how should I structure my experience for this person, maybe a little differently because this person is a clinician?
I could start on that one. I think what I found very helpful up front, and I think I kind of reiterate something I said a little bit earlier, is the whole challenging the clinicians to do non-clinical things up front. Because by understanding that, then the clinical piece actually ties in at the end, and that's something that you know very well. And so you can piece those 2 together. I found, because I was challenged to do that, and look what happened. I found out I love logistics and all these different things. I don't know, maybe there's a future there later on. But I think that started me off on a good path, a good direction. Expectations-wise, I felt very uncomfortable. So just knowing up front that me as an RN, a clinician going into the administrative world, just felt completely dissociated from all those things that I started off with that were all non-clinical. But it's probably, I got encouragement, I got guidance, I got advice to just keep going in that direction. So it's just offering those pieces to help encouraging them to move forward in that direction. And I think which also challenged me was oftentimes he would say, work on the non-clinical things as your projects. Don't try to do clinical things that you already know. So all of my projects are pretty much non-clinical. My best practice is logistics. But I felt like it made me understand the workings and the operations in terms of all of those things that I didn't understand before. So it strengthened my knowledge base in the non-clinical and helped me segue that into some of the clinical things I already knew.
But I would add to that, I said up front that it was one of my goals to push myself out of my clinical comfort zone, but I kind of came a little full circle on that a little bit, because at the end I sort of realized too, like, do what you love, so while I did push myself to be in non-clinical meetings and non-clinical discussions and stuff, I also think healthcare, I mean, it's healthcare delivery, and in clinical is a large part of what we do. And like to not that my experience, my clinical experience was very valuable in like my hip fracture project that I did. So I kind of feel like make it a mix, you know, allow people to kind of do also what feels comfortable and what they're strong at. And like I felt like I really brought a value to my organization because of my ability to kind of herd a bunch of cats with all the committee, the physician committee that we had to, you know, have for this hip fracture and stuff like. So I think a little bit of just to counterbalance that is also let clinicians be clinicians sometimes too.
So going with that, I think for me, what I was really surprised about is how dissociated a lot of administration is from patient care, right? We forget who the customer is in the long run, and part of that is because it's really hard as a coder sitting in a room to remember that it's a patient that you're coding this chart on, or wherever you're working, right? And so I think you can leverage those clinicians specifically for that, because that's an opportunity to bridge that gap that just it needs to be bridged. And I think it brings a lot of joy to the people who are doing their jobs when they remember, oh, what I do impacts, you know, the patient at the end level and actually makes a difference. So that's how I would approach that.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Questions from the audience? Excuse me.
Hey, great job, guys. Thanks. Actually, this is because we've been talking a lot about competencies, and especially, and we didn't emphasize that so much with your class or even this one, but going forward, we want to, and to sort of underpin that concept of being able to target competencies. So apart from not quoting the Gemesi competencies or whatever, how do you feel about this experience now? You're at the end of the 2 years. Again, hearty congratulations to all of you. You did a great job. So as we say, it's a competency-based program between the didactic year and your residency. Do you feel more competent? Because I personally, I'll throw this out here, I think clinicians who know the admin side can be very, very powerful. And I know that folks, you know, we admin folks who are more familiar with the clinic, I think, can be very, very powerful as well. So I'm looking forward to that. But how do you feel about your experience now at nearly the end? Do you feel more competent?
So I think I think I had the most traumatic experience here. So on this one, because going through residency, I never wanted to be a primary care pediatrician. It's boring. It's a lot of well babies and talking, and that's not who my personality is. But so I never found that thing that I was really passionate about, though. I liked a lot of different subspecialties, but nothing I was willing to, you know, just go for until I found this analytics thing, and it was like, boom. And so I was completely incompetent in that area. And now at this point, because of self-study and because of, you know, the ability to chase that this last year and go with that, it's grown a lot to the point that I'm going to J6, so at DHA. So.
I mean, for me, I was always the clinician. I was the chief of the BAMC allergy clinic for several years, trying to make my case to the administrators of why I needed another allergist or why we needed another, you know, whatever. I didn't understand BCAs very well. The lingo I didn't understand very well, and now I feel like I can walk into those conversations and hold my own. I know the lingo. I know how to make my case. I know how to talk administrative. So for me, I definitely feel. I mean, I'm really excited. I'm heading into the DCCS position at Fort Meade, which is sort of like a CMO for civilian folks. It's a smaller facility, but it's not a large hospital. But just to say, but it's an administrative job, and I feel very well qualified. I feel very like I'm excited to go there and bring some of the things, best practices out of my civilian experience and things. So I mean, it's been extremely valuable for me. And I mean, the competencies, I just want to touch on that for just a minute. I have a background, I worked in graduate medical education. I was the associate program director for a transitional year internship at BAMC, and did a lot of, precepting of residents and young interns, young doctors. And we focus a lot on competencies in the GME world too, and because we want to know that we're graduating competent doctors. It is so hard to measure some of these things, and I think our program really tries. I mean, we really try to, but like some, you know, how do you necessarily measure professionalism? How do you measure that? So I do think, yes, competencies are important. Bless you. Yes, we should be making some effort to quantitate or actually really demonstrate something objective that shows growth in competencies. But I just want to remind everyone, I know we all know this, but it's also not a perfect science. And so it's hard to kind of know when you're competent at something.
Yes. With the exception of one chapter of one class, the material management section of operations management, I knew nothing about, I mean, I'm way more competent than I was. If you want to talk ship steering, azimuth taking, celestial navigation, I was your guy up until 2 years ago. So yeah, I mean, I'm way more competent. Of course, now they're sending me to the Federal Health Center, the only truly DoD VA integrated system in Great Lakes, which will be a brand new language, and I won't be competent once again. Right back to where I was.
Similar for me. I definitely feel more competent than when I started, definitely. And the amount that I have learned, the amount that I've seen and done within this year has truly grown, the amount of knowledge base that I have and preparing me for my next position. I'm actually going back to the Institute of Surgical Research, but now in an administrative position, looking at metrics as a methods analyst, as a mini bod, COD, all rolled into one. And I think I have the foundation now to really understand what I'm looking at, what I'm looking for, what does it mean. But I've also learned you don't really know everything, and there are subject matter experts out there that you need to reach out to as well. And I could always reach out to my Baylor folks as well. And I mean, throughout the year we've done that a lot because a lot of us have had different experiences. You know, lots of competence there to share and lean on. But for sure, big difference from first entering in all nervous and unsure, and now feeling way more confident about my skills and ability.
Thank you all very much. Yay, run. No, just kidding. All right, last call for questions. Any other burning questions from the audience? Okay, if there are no questions, I just want to say thank you to all of you. Again, congratulations. Thank you for representing Army-Baylor students the way you have done this past year. We appreciate that. We're very, very proud of you. And how about a big round of applause for our students? Well, thanks again. That does end this briefing. Thank you all very much again for joining us. We appreciate you.